The text from my daughter was only 14 words long, but it destroyed 35 years of sacrifice. Mom, you don't need to come this summer. Ethan thinks the lake house should be just for our family. I read it over and over, wondering if she'd forgotten one tiny detail. I wasn't a guest. I was the woman who had worked overtime, skipped vacations, and spent my life savings to build that lake house from the ground up. They thought they could quietly push me out, so I quietly signed a different set of papers. 24 days later, they arrived for summer vacation and found strangers living inside. People always imagine betrayal arrives with shouting, slammed doors, or dramatic goodbyes. Mine came in a text message. It was a quiet Tuesday morning in early June. I had just poured myself a cup of coffee and was sitting on the back porch, watching the sun rise over the maple trees. Retirement had finally given me mornings like this, peaceful, unhurried, exactly what I'd worked 35 years to earn. Then my phone vibrated. It was a message from my daughter, Claire. I smiled before opening it. Every summer, Claire, her husband Ethan, and my 2 grandchildren spent 2 weeks with me at the lake house. It had become our tradition. The children loved fishing from the dock, roasting marshmallows by the fire pit, and racing each other down the wooden pier every morning. Those summers were the happiest days of my year. I expected Claire's message to be about grocery lists or whether the kids still wanted blueberry pancakes for breakfast. Instead, I read words that didn't seem real. Mom, you don't need to come this summer. Ethan thinks it's better if we keep the lake house for our family. I blinked. Then I read it again. And again. Somehow, each time hurt a little more. The lake house. Our family? I stared across the yard, trying to understand what I'd just read. That lake house wasn't a vacation rental. It wasn't inherited. It wasn't something we all owned together. I had bought every inch of that property. After my husband, Daniel, passed away 12 years earlier, I buried myself in work instead of grief. I accepted extra projects, skipped vacations, and saved every bonus. While my friends upgraded cars or traveled the world, I quietly built a retirement fund with one dream in mind. A place where my family would always have somewhere to come home to. 5 years later, I found it. An old lakefront cottage that needed more repairs than most people were willing to take on. The roof leaked. The dock leaned sideways. The porch looked like it might collapse if someone sneezed too hard. Everyone told me to walk away. Instead, I saw possibility. Over the next 3 years, I poured my savings and my heart into transforming that little cottage into the home everyone loved. Every bedroom was designed with my grandchildren in mind. The kitchen became large enough for holiday dinners. The backyard filled with swings, flower beds, and picnic tables. Every nail, every paintbrush, every mortgage payment, every tax bill came from me. Not because anyone asked me to, because I wanted my family to have memories that would outlive me. And until that morning, I honestly believed they appreciated it. My hands trembled as I called Claire. Straight to voicemail. I tried again. No answer. A few minutes later, another message appeared. We'll talk later. Please don't make this harder than it has to be. Harder? I wasn't even sure what this was. I wasn't angry. Not yet. Mostly, I was confused. Had I done something wrong? Had I offended Ethan without realizing it? Had Claire misunderstood something I'd said? For the rest of the day, I replayed every conversation we'd had over the past year. Nothing explained this. That evening, I looked through old photo albums. There was Claire at 8 years old, proudly holding her first fish off that very dock. There she was again at 16, laughing as Daniel taught her how to steer our little fishing boat. Then pictures of my grandchildren building sandcastles near the shoreline, wrapped in towels after swimming until sunset. Those photographs reminded me why I'd worked so hard. The lake house had never been about property. It had always been about family, which made Claire's message impossible to understand. Late that night, sleep refused to come. Instead, I walked into my home office and opened the bottom drawer of my desk. Inside sat a thick blue folder. Across the front, in neat black letters, were 2 words: property documents. I rested my hand on the folder for several long seconds. Then, for the first time since reading my daughter's message, A different feeling replaced the heartbreak.
Clarity.
If my own daughter truly believed I no longer belonged in the home I had built with my life savings, then it was time to remind everyone exactly who that home belonged to. The next morning, I didn't call Claire again. I didn't send another text. Instead, I got into my car and drove 2 hours to the lake house. The entire drive, I kept hoping there had been some misunderstanding. Maybe Ethan had sent the message without Claire knowing. Maybe the wording had come across harsher than intended. Maybe everything would make sense once we talked face to face. As I turned onto the gravel road leading to the property, I noticed 3 unfamiliar SUVs parked outside. The front door was wide open. Children's laughter drifted through the trees. For a brief moment, hearing my grandchildren laugh almost made me forget the message. Then I stepped onto the porch. Nobody looked surprised to see me. Claire smiled awkwardly. "Mom, I wasn't expecting you today. I figured we'd talk better in person." Before she could answer, Ethan walked out carrying a tape measure. He barely looked at me before pointing toward the living room. "I've been thinking we'll knock out this wall after Labor Day. It'll really open the space." I frowned. "After Labor Day?" He nodded as though we were discussing the weather.
Yeah.
"It'll make entertaining a lot easier." I looked around the room. Blueprint sketches sat on the coffee table. Paint samples covered the kitchen counter. Someone had placed catalogs filled with luxury furniture beside the fireplace. Claire picked one up. "We're thinking lighter colors. More modern." I asked quietly. She hesitated. "Ethan and I." I slowly set my purse on the chair. "You've already planned renovations?" Ethan laughed. "We're just getting ahead of things." Then he looked toward the backyard. "My parents are excited too. They want to spend every July here once everything's finished." "His parents?" I stared at him. "This has always been our family place." He smiled politely. "Exactly." Then he said something I'll never forget. "It'll finally become our lake house." Those 4 words landed harder than the text message. Our lake house. Not yours. Not your mother's.
Ours.
Claire noticed my expression. "Mom, don't take it the wrong way." "I'm trying not to." She folded her arms. "We've just been thinking about the future." "The future?" She nodded. "You've worked your whole life. Traveling back and forth gets harder every year." "I'm 62, I replied with a small smile. "I still mow my own lawn." "I know." She looked embarrassed. "But Ethan thinks you'd probably enjoy visiting instead of hosting." Visiting. In the home I'd spent years creating. Ethan stepped in. "It just makes more sense this way." I looked him directly in the eyes. "Did either of you ever think to ask what I wanted?" Silence. Neither of them answered. Instead, Claire quietly said, "We thought you'd understand." That sentence told me everything. They hadn't asked because they believed the decision had already been made. Not legally. Emotionally. Somewhere along the way, my generosity had become an expectation. The home I had lovingly shared had slowly transformed, in their minds, into something they already owned. I stayed another 15 minutes. We talked about nothing important. The weather. The grandchildren's summer camp. The fishing dock. No one mentioned the text again. When I hugged my grandchildren goodbye, I smiled just as I always did. None of this was their fault. As I drove away, I didn't cry. Not anymore. The sadness had quietly turned into certainty. The following morning, I met with my financial advisor. 2 days later, I sat across from a real estate attorney. Every document confirmed exactly what I already knew. The lake house belonged solely to me. Free and clear. Because waterfront property had increased dramatically in value, several buyers had already expressed interest over the previous year. I had always ignored the offers. Until now. Within a week, one family offered more than I ever imagined the property was worth. They loved it exactly as it was. No walls removed. No renovations. No assumptions. I accepted. The contracts were signed. The closing date was scheduled. June 24th. As I walked out of the attorney's office with the signed paperwork in my hands, I realized something. For the first time in weeks, I could finally breathe. For the next 2 weeks, I said nothing. The sale moved forward quietly. Inspections were completed. The buyers transferred their deposit. The attorney called one Friday afternoon with 4 simple words. It's officially recorded. The lake house had a new owner. For the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for putting myself first. 3 days later, my phone rang.
Claire.
She sounded cheerful. Mom, we're leaving early Saturday morning. The kids are so excited. Emma already packed her fishing pole. I smiled softly. I hope you have a safe trip. There was a brief silence. Are you coming up later this week? No. Another pause. Well, we'll see you next month then. I took a slow breath. Claire, before you leave, you should check the address. She laughed. What does that mean? I think you'll understand when you get there. She sounded confused, but she didn't ask another question. The next afternoon, I was watering flowers in my backyard when my phone exploded with calls. First Claire, then Ethan, then Claire again. Finally, I answered.
Mom.
Claire almost shouted. There are strangers at the lake house. I know. They're moving furniture inside. I know. They said they own it. They do. Silence. Complete silence. When Claire finally spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. You sold it? Yes. But why would you do that? I leaned against the porch railing. Because according to your message, I wasn't needed there anymore. Mom, that's not what I meant. Then tell me what you meant. She couldn't. Instead, Ethan took the phone. You had no right to do this without telling us. His words almost made me laugh. No right? It's been our family place for years. No, Ethan. I kept my voice calm. It was my home that I chose to share with my family. I let those words settle before continuing. You planned renovations. You invited your parents. You decided when I could visit. And somehow, neither of you thought I deserved a conversation. No one answered. Finally, Claire began crying. We never thought you'd actually. I know. You thought I'd simply accept becoming a guest in the home I built. Again, silence. A week passed before Claire knocked on my front door. She came alone. No Ethan. No children. Just my daughter. The moment I opened the door, she wrapped her arms around me. I'm sorry. Those were the first words she spoke. Not excuses. Not explanations. Just an apology. She admitted they had slowly started treating the lake house as though it already belonged to them. It hadn't happened overnight. Little assumptions had become expectations. Expectations had become entitlement. And by the time she sent that text message, she never stopped to imagine how those words would feel to the woman who had sacrificed so much to create that place. I hugged her tightly. I forgive you. She looked relieved. But forgiveness, I said gently, doesn't erase consequences. She nodded. I understand. Over the following months, our relationship slowly healed. Not because we pretended nothing had happened, but because we finally learned to have honest conversations. As for me, I used part of the money from the sale to take the first real vacation of my life. I stood on an ocean cliff at sunset, listening to waves crash against the rocks. For decades, I believed love meant giving people everything you had. Now I understood something even more important. Real love doesn't require you to surrender your self-respect. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself and for the people you love is remind them that generosity is a gift, never an obligation. And as I watched the sun disappear below the horizon, I realized I hadn't lost my family's home. I'd finally found my own peace. The end.